Viewings are a key part of the due diligence process on any property. And they can also be a really exciting part of the process because it feels like you're building momentum towards actually securing that property. But it's actually easy to get carried away and excited and to focus on the wrong things. And this can actually cost you thousands of pounds and come back to really bite you in the arse later on down the line if you miss out things on this viewing. And that's what I'm going to be covering today. I'm going to be talking about 5 things that are very easy to miss on a viewing that I want you to pick up so it doesn't bite you and come back to haunt you later on. Number 1 is roofs. It's an obvious point to say, but it is fundamental to have a roof that's in good repair to make your property watertight, because if it isn't watertight, it can cause huge problems, including damp, including water penetration, which then will damage internally, damage your ceilings, potentially have rotten floor joists, rotten roof beams. So there are many reasons to get it right at viewing stage to ensure that your roof is actually in a good condition, or if it isn't, to actually find out where the problems are. So some of the common problems that you need to look out for are, firstly, missing tiles or cracked tiles, which will let in water. And this is a case of looking at the back of the property and looking at the front of the property and really spending some time looking at obvious signs of wear and tear on those tiles or roof covering. The next point is around flashings. The flashings are the seal between the different points of the roof. So you always have a seal where the chimney meets the roof, and if there's any other connections of the roof, so say if there's an extension, that will have a seal in between those 2 different roof parts. The flashings are often worn. On older properties, they are concrete, and is always recommended to have metal flashings because they are more robust and they last longer. So that's something that comes up on most surveys that I see on our clients' properties is flashings. So do have a look at the condition of those if you can, and factor in some contingency for them because they will often need replacing. Another thing is flat roofs. If you've got a flat roof, you need to try and look at it from above, because flat roofs have a shorter lifespan than slated and pitched roofs, and that's why insurers don't like them. So you need to ensure that you have evaluated them and evaluated their condition. If you see any type of sagging or any type of water that's pooling, so little kind of mini swimming pools on top of your roof, that means that it's potentially failed and that will need replacing. So it's really important to look at the condition of your flat roof, and ideally from above. Another thing roof related is guttering and fascias. So the fascias are the boards that hold the guttering to the building. The wooden ones often rot over time, and the modern version of them is plastic. So do look at the condition of those. And guttering as well, again, it's about water tightness, and having inadequate guttering can cause damp. So do look at all guttering across the whole property, back and front. And it's just super important to look at roofs in general, because I've heard some horror stories of new investors not looking at roofs and it either coming back to haunt them on the survey, where the survey actually says they need a new roof, and then they potentially have to pull out the deal. I've even heard an example of a investor who bought a property and hadn't even looked at the roof, and then I think they actually bought 3 properties, all on the same street, all in a row, and all of the roofs needed replacing. So obviously that was a costly mistake for them. So do make sure you are looking at your roofs. The next point is damp. Now you may be thinking, well, damp's really obvious, but sometimes it can be hidden, and the signs of it are not always obvious. So I've seen damp hidden behind kitchen cupboards, behind boarding or cladding that the landlord or the previous owner has put up. So potentially cladding in the bathroom, cladding in kitchens I've even seen landlords, sneaky landlords, put shelving in front of damp to hide it. So ensure that you are evaluating and assessing all areas of a property and considering if there is accessing cladding or wall coverings. Maybe dig a little bit deeper, have a look on the outside, see if there's any other signs of damp, because there is some sneaky people out there that will try to hide things from you. If you do discover damp, if you do see signs of damp, whether that's stains, whether that's peeling paint, whether that's a smell of damp, that's a a really key one. If it smells musty, don't necessarily panic. It's about actually understanding what is causing that damp. There are two types of damp. You've got penetrative damp, which is coming from the outside, or you've got rising damp, which is coming from beneath. You often see penetrating damp on the upstairs of a property, for example, because the guttering may be broken or pointing may be needed on the outside. The pointing is the layers of cement in between the bricks, so sometimes there's gaps in that which is letting water through, so there are easy fixes, but you do sometimes get penetrative damp on the bottom of a property as well, and that often is to do with pointing. If it's rising damp, then that means you will need to put in a damp proof course during your refurbishment. But again, it's about understanding the extent of that damp problem. And I would always recommend using a damp meter and doing an assessment of all the downstairs walls with a damp meter, and take damp meter readings to give you a much better understanding of where there isn't damp. And if you do find damp, I would recommend getting a damp specialist in to provide you a quote to ensure that you're getting accurate costings and an accurate assessment from a professional. So next is single skin walls. So a single skin wall is a building term essentially for the amount of layers of bricks in a building. The standard way of building a property over the last 100 years has been to have 2 layers of bricks in a wall. So that's what a cavity wall is. The cavity is in between 2 layers of bricks. So when we're talking about single skin, we mean that there's 1 layer and no cavity wall. This means that your property and that room and those walls are essentially colder. They are more liable to have damp problems because there is less protection from the elements and water coming in. And this means that those rooms are going to have more wear and tear and maintenance issues, particularly around damp and general kind of moisture in the air. And it's important to pick these up because I've heard of stories previously of people buying properties where they have a bathroom, for example, that has 2 single skin walls, and the mortgage companies refuse to give them a mortgage because of those walls, because they see them as a liability because of the increased risk of damp. So you need to ensure that you're noticing them. They are often going to be at the back of a property. They are going to be on extensions or on old outhouses, often kitchens and bathrooms, particularly in kind of northern properties where you have a bathroom on the downstairs at the back, which is often an old outhouse or an old coal shed, which has been converted, or a garage as well. That's the other thing. So all of those are going to have single skin walls because they haven't necessarily been built for living in. They've been built for other purposes, and then they've just been modified to as an extension of the house. And it is those areas where you're going to get those single skin walls. How to spot these walls? They're going to be external walls, and you can often see them from the width. And a good way of doing that is looking at the window and how much of a recess there is around the window compared to the brick. And you should be able to see sort of 2 widths of brick on normal windows, and on these single skin windows and walls there will only be essentially 1 brick's worth of width. So that is one way of looking at it as well, and also looking at it from the outside will help you as well. So make sure you look out for these because they are often quite difficult to spot. If you're enjoying this video today, I'd really appreciate if you could like and subscribe to the channel. Those metrics are so key to us and to helping to provide more content for you, so I appreciate the support. Thank you. So next is front and back garden condition. You'll notice that a lot of the things that I'm talking about are actually on the external of the property, and that's because in my experience, people get so focused on the internals of the property and making sure that everything internally is evaluated that they kind of forget the externals. And I think particularly the garden, because the garden is kind of seen like a nice to have, and because it's not necessarily structural related to the property, I think it's overlooked. But that is quite a mistake, because a garden which is kind of overgrown and needs a lot of, landscaping, for example, or tidying up, can actually cost thousands of pounds. A landscape of a garden to potentially, level it all, or put a new lawn in, or put some decking or gravel, you're looking at a few £1,000s minimum for that work. So it is really important to assess the condition of the garden. As a landlord, you want a low maintenance garden because you want to ensure that you're keeping your costs down. There's no guarantee that your tenant is going to be a keen gardener and therefore they're going to look after the garden for you. So you want to keep your costs down, and that means you need to ensure that you're factoring in any costs or work that needs to be done on your garden to make it low maintenance. So you need to ensure you're looking at potential overgrowth and tidying that up. Trees can be a big one. It can cost you a few £100, even over £1,000 to cut back some trees depending on their size, depending on their height. So make sure you're looking at those and their condition. And also if they're close to the house. Again, some insurers don't like that because there is a subsidence risk. So do factor in the trees and make sure you're assessing those. Look for any invasive species. So what do I mean by that? I mean weeds that essentially are going to cause problems to your house and could make it unmortgageable. So Japanese knotweed is the biggest one. It's essentially an illegal species and you actually have to inform the government, the local council, if you have Japanese knotweed in your garden, and it costs a few £1,000s to get rid of that, and it can make it unmortgageable depending on how close it is to the property. And bamboo is another one because if you've got bamboo in your garden, bamboo grows everywhere and through anything, so it can grow through concrete and it can go through the concrete and potentially into the house. I've seen photos of that before, so make sure you're looking out for things like that. And the other big thing in gardens is fences. So fences can cost a few £1,000s to replace. So look out for the condition of fences. Have you got any fences that are kind of wobbly or just about to fall down? Because it's very likely when we get the inevitable storms that we have in the winter that will fall down and then you will need to replace it then. And it's probably easier to replace it, at the beginning when you've got no tenant in. So make sure you look at fences because it can be a costly mistake to miss, but also a fence falling down can also cause damage and can be a health and safety problem as well. So point 5 is what's in close proximity to your property. So this is actually not even about your property itself, but what is surrounding it. And this is all to do with lending, risk, insurance, saleability, and valuation. There are a number of factors which can affect the value of your property and potentially make it unmortgageable. So for example, if your property is next to a fast food restaurant or a takeaway or a petrol station, that will be seen as a fire risk because all of those have fire related risks associated with them. And that means from an insurance point of view and from a lending point of view, there is a chance that you might not get insurance or your insurance will be really expensive. And I've known cases when lenders won't lend on a property if it's next to a petrol station, for example, because of the risk of explosion and fire. And then you've got the point around valuation and saleability. And what do I mean by saleability? Well, that is what valuation is based on. It is the lender's evaluation of how much your property would sell for on the open market, how attractive your property is, and how easy it will be to sell if it needed to be sold by them so they can get their money back. And anything unsightly next to your property will affect the saleability. So if you've got a off license next to your property or a takeaway, because takeaways have smells, off licenses they don't like because they will sort of see them as potentially people hanging around them, drinking, for example. You've also got, as well as boarded up properties. Boarded up properties is a really big one in terms of affecting that evaluation because people don't want to live next to abandoned properties that will essentially bring down the area and mean that it has a reputation for not being cared for. Funeral directors is another one. No one wants to live next to a funeral directors. So all of those will affect your valuation. So it's so important that you're looking at this and assessing what's around your property, because I've seen cases where you get a potential 10% down valuation from being close to any one of those elements. And when I mean close to, I mean not just next door, I mean potentially opposite or within sight of the property, so you can see a shop in sight of your property, or even a few doors down. So make sure you're looking at the whole street and assessing it. The other thing to look out for is there any properties in the vicinity which have cracks or subsidence? Because this could mean that, particularly in areas of coal mining, for example, so the northwest, northeast and Wales, you've got a area which is prone to subsidence, but your property might not have any evidence of that, but the properties like around it on the same street may have evidence of that. I've seen examples of that when you've got cracking across all of the other properties opposite, and even an example of where one property was pulled down and there was just a gap for a property that obviously been pulled down because of poor condition. So make sure you're looking out for signs of those cracks on your other properties and not just on yours. So that's 5 things you need to look out for on a viewing, and that could be easily missed. And as you would have seen, most of them are external to the property, so roofs, gardens, what's in close proximity to your property. It's not just about the internals, it's not even just about the property itself, it is about the whole kind of neighborhood and street as well, which will affect your valuation and whether you're able to get lending. In general, you need to have a checklist and follow a process on a viewing, so you're ensuring that you're not missing any of these elements and that every viewing you're doing is the same and you're not going to cause problems for yourself later on down the line. Thanks so much for watching this video today. I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe. We're trying to grow this channel, get more content out to people like yourself, so your support will be very much appreciated. Thank you.